Welcome to The Point with Anna Kasparian. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and we're doing our show from our new studio, which is possibly temporary. We don't know the details on it yet, but I like it way more than any other studio that we've done the show from. Now, with that said, we have a great show ahead for you guys. We have great guests, and we have topics that I've been dying to talk about on the program. So let me just give you a little taste before we go to No Filter. We're going to talk about women who allege that they are being coerced into being sterilized in the California prison system. TYT did a documentary on it along with the Center for Investigative Reporting, and I can't wait to show you a little bit of that. We're also going to talk about the latest on George Zimmerman and how he got arrested. Again, why does this continue to happen with him? And we're also going to have a discussion about jail sentences and how there are more than 3,000 people in the United States that are serving life sentences without the chance of parole, many of which were imprisoned because of drug-related charges. However, there are some cases where guys can literally rape women and they get absolutely no jail sentence at all, even if a grand jury finds them guilty. And finally, we are going to talk about Walmart and how they are trying to, I guess, do something nice for their underpaid employees, but in an effort to do so, they got a lot of ridicule for it. But before we get to all of that fun stuff and before we meet our guest for today's show, let's go to No Filter, where I will talk about the importance of doing something inspiring. There's always a lot of emphasis on doing something that'll be highly profitable. I mean, of course, we live in this capitalistic society where wealth is key to happiness, even though we know that the more money you have, it doesn't necessarily mean the happier you will become. However, recently something really interesting happened in my life, and I wanted to share the story with you. I know I often like to rant about something in my No Filter, but today I kind of want to give you guys a little bit of advice and share a little bit about myself. So recently I started teaching a class at Cal State Northridge. It's a journalism class, and it's the university that I actually got both my degrees in. And I love the university, I love journalism, and I love working with students, so I agreed to teach that one class, even though the pay is insanely little. I was actually shocked when I was told by the department how little I was going to be making for the class. Now, there's a tremendous amount of preparation that goes into putting a class together. I created my own syllabus from scratch, even though I had never done that before. And there is a lot of work that you do outside of the classroom. But I wanted to do it because I wanted to see if I had the ability to inspire other people. Maybe there were some students who were a little interested in journalism, but they didn't know whether or not they actually wanted to pursue a career in journalism. Well, after a lot of really hard work, a few days ago after class, one of my students approached me and told me, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that this class changed my life." And that was the single best moment of my year. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. I actually mean it. She told me that she started the program because she needed a degree. She had no real passion for journalism. She didn't know whether or not she wanted to work in the media. But after taking my class, she realized that you can use journalism as a way of changing the world, informing others, and improving our democratic process here in the United States. Because you can't have a real democracy if you have mainstream media spreading misinformation. So that was a really great feeling, and I realized that moment felt much better to me than any moment where I got a bonus at work or where I got a job offer that indicated or implied that I would make more money. And there have been moments in my career where I've been offered jobs that would pay me way more than what I make here at TYT. But sometimes you got to balance what makes you happy. Is it money, or is it doing something that makes you fulfilled? Is it doing something that makes you inspired or could inspire others? And I know that it's really difficult to go for something that might pay you less, but I will tell you one thing. It makes you feel so good to know that you might possibly change someone's life or change someone's perspective on the world. So with that said, I hope you guys always reconsider what you're doing in life. Don't buy into the bullshit about how you have to have the brightest and nicest and newest expensive thing. Focus on the things that really matter in life. Help your brothers and sisters out. Do things that make you happy, because at the end of the day, we're all going to die. We want to make sure we feel fulfilled with the life that we have. Let's go ahead and meet our panelists. Priscilla Ocean is an associate professor of law at the Loyola Law School of Los Angeles and author of the recent scholarly article, Punishing Pregnancy, Race, Incarceration, and the Shackling of Pregnant Prisoners. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Jody David Armour is a returning guest here on The Point, and he is the Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law at the University of Southern California, as well as a Soros Justice Senior Fellow of the Open Society Institute's Center on Crime, Communities, and Culture. He's also the author of Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism, The Hidden Costs of Being Black in America. Thank you so much for coming back.
Good to be back.
And Diane Leffer is a playwright and author whose most recent novel is The Fiery Alphabet. She's also a longtime activist who writes about criminal justice issues for LA Progressive and New Clear Vision, and has facilitated workshops in Los Angeles for men on parole and youth impacted by the juvenile justice system. Thank you for joining us, Diane. All right, I want to start off with a documentary that I recently worked on with the Center for Investigative Reporting. It tackles a topic that I was actually very unaware of until very recently. It turns out that some of the prisons in California have been sterilizing women, and that is something that actually goes against the regulations in California, but it was still taking place as early as 2010. Now, before I give too much away, I want to show you a little bit of the documentary, and then we'll discuss.
What we found thus far in the reporting is that there were rules in place, and that the officials involved in recommending these procedures to the women knew that the rules were in place and consciously decided to break the rules.
How was this allowed to happen? To understand how, it's important to look at California's long history of state-sponsored sterilizations and even eugenics. If you look back, there was this doctor by the name of Leo Stanley who went into prisons and literally removed the testicles of male inmates and replaced them with testicles of men who had died but were deemed socially fit. And he had sterilized as many as 600 men in the state of California. And if you look at California as a whole, you'll notice that it was actually the worst state when it came to the eugenics program. They basically sterilized as many as 20,000 people and accounted for about 1/3 of sterilizations in the entire country. So it's a little crazy to imagine that this is something that's still taking place today within our California prisons. And who knows, if an investigative reporter goes out there, they might find that this is happening in other prisons throughout the country. However, the one thing that I will say is, you know, we spoke to so many different women who talked about the issue of informed consent. And in most of these cases, or I should say all of the cases, the women signed some sort of form indicating that they were consenting to that procedure being done. However, there is an argument that when you are behind bars and when there is a doctor telling you that you should get sterilized, you can't really consent to it because there is an imbalance of power. Priscilla, you have some experience working with women in the prison system. So I want to first ask you, is this something that you have experienced at all? And also, can a female prisoner give consent to something like sterilization?
Well, so first of all, yes, and thank you so much for drawing attention to this issue with the documentary and with the segment. You know, I, as an attorney and now as someone who teaches and studies in the area, have had many conversations with women in prison. You know, I had a conversation with one woman who was diagnosed with fibroids, uterine fibroids, and the doctor recommended as the first course of treatment a hysterectomy, a radical hysterectomy. It's a Black woman, and she was not given any other information about any other alternative treatments that would have been short of a hysterectomy, right? So this gets to your point about informed consent. How can there really be informed consent when women aren't given all of the options? And beyond that, the idea of informed consent in an inherently coercive environment like a prison just seems like a contradiction in terms, which is why the federal government has policies against the funding of elective sterilizations like the ones that were performed in California prisons. They're against international norms because of the fact that it's difficult, if not impossible, to give truly informed consent in places like prisons where women, sort of by definition, have almost no power over their bodies or themselves.
Jody, what would you say to those who make the argument that, you know, some of these women are in the prison system because they've been convicted of serious felonies and they have multiple children that they are unable to take care of? So maybe sterilization is the right way to go about it. I know that that was one particular comment that we kept getting over and over again on the documentary. And do you see that as a legitimate concern?
Oh, it's a concern. I'm not going to call it legitimate, but it's one that's out there. And you really, this is first-rate investigative reporting, you forged a link between reproductive rights issues generally that have been the focus of, say, middle-class white women who the state is trying to make procreate, get in the way of their controlling their procreation by making them procreate with transvaginal ultrasounds and all kinds of other ways to make you procreate, versus another group of women that they're trying to keep from procreating. And they're trying to keep them from procreating because they're not white and middle class, but because of this eugenics concern that you're raising. And they are criminals. And we don't really care about criminals, do we? There's just so much toxic human waste to be warehoused somewhere and forgotten about, ideally. And so that kind of attitude we have towards criminals and criminality that has marked the last 30 years of the crack plague and its festering aftermath is really just kind of coming home and expressing itself once again in how little we care about their autonomy, their personhood, or anything else that would mark them as deserving of our care and attention.
Do you feel that this is really about controlling the population of a certain group of people? Because you know, some might say, no, these doctors are just trying to help these women out. They're too old to have children. They don't have the resources to have children. So they have good intent. Would you agree with that, or do you really feel that this is about population control?
Well, there's certainly a eugenic component to it, because they're going after predominantly poor women and women of color. So there is this concern that you're having too many kids and you're a burden on the public coffers. We're having to, one doctor said something to that effect.
Dr. Heinrich said that.
Yes, Heinrich. It's much cheaper to perform the sterilization than to have to pay for the progeny that will come if we don't control your procreation. So to say you're not fit for procreation is very different than saying you must procreate. And what I like about this piece is it connected the two issues. It connected the issues that middle-class white women are concerned about, the state trying to make them procreate, with what's happening to socially marginalized women, where we're trying to take their right of procreation away. I thought it was a real nice piece for that.
Diane, jump in about, you know, our justice system as a whole and this issue of recidivism, because we imprison so many people. We are the #1 country when it comes to imprisoning people, and we have a very high recidivism rate. And so do you feel that our prison system is much more about being punitive as opposed to helping people out, rehabilitating them, and allowing them to become, you know, members of society?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, just as one example, you know, we passed in California the law that would have allowed diversion for drug offenders so that they could go to treatment instead of going to prison. However, you had to pay for inpatient treatment yourself. No money was allocated, so that rich people went to drug treatment and poor people went to prison, sometimes for very, very long sentences. People get no training, no education, no therapy. I met a man, I'm more familiar with male prisoners than female. I met one man, he waited 10 years on a waiting list to be allowed to attend an AA meeting in prison. So how are people supposed to get better? And then you come out, you're given $200 gate money, you're put out the door with no place to go, no place to stay, no phone, no address, and now we wonder why there's a recidivism rate? I mean, it's absolutely insane. But I'd like to say one more thing about the coercive power of prison. Prisoners have told me again and again, when you're told to sign something in prison, if you don't sign it, there will be retaliation against you.
And it goes back to the issue of informed consent, yeah.
Yeah, you're not free. And in fact, there's one case, the guy, he signed what he was told, if you don't sign, there'll be retaliation. And one of the guards assured him, I'm going to put a letter in your file saying, I observed the incident, you did nothing wrong, and you'll be protected. He got up to his parole hearing, and they pulled out his signed agreement that he'd done something wrong, and the guard's letter, and the parole board said, well, we all know guards lie. Why should we believe the guard's letter? So guards aren't lying when it's to the detriment of the prisoner, but if they say anything on behalf of a prisoner, it's obviously a lie. The prisoner has no power in these situations, none whatsoever.
Let's talk a little bit about what gets people in prison in the first place. I mean, we have an issue with the way that we prosecute people, and you know, the law seems to target very specific people when it comes to nonviolent drug offenses. I mean, you look at the numbers, and you see that drug laws will disproportionately impact minority groups more than whites. And that has been problematic for the community because we talk about institutional racism, and I don't think people understand. I think people see someone in prison, they say, okay, that is a convicted felon, they deserve to be there, they deserve the worst of the worst. But what is the reality, Priscilla? Can you jump in and talk about, you know, the disproportionate amount of blacks and Latinos that are behind bars for nonviolent drug offenses, and what kind of impact that has for the entire community?
Yeah, so I mean, the disparities that we see are sort of built into the administration of the criminal justice system at all levels, not just with respect to sentencing. Sort of one of the things that most people will talk about is the disparity between crack cocaine and crack cocaine and cocaine, right? So at the time that this disparity was enacted, there was a 1 to 100 ratio. So you would be sentenced 100 times more harshly for the possession, distribution of crack cocaine than you would for powder cocaine. That's been reduced under President Obama to 1 to 10, but it's still a significant disparity. But that's not the only place where you have these types of racial biases, right? Crack cocaine is associated more with poor racial minority communities, whereas powder cocaine is associated with more affluent whites, right? We can look at a number of stories that have just come out where this sort of narrative is being replicated. But it's not just with respect to crack cocaine, it's with respect to street level enforcement. Police target communities where they think this type of activity is happening, and that reproduces the racial disparity. You know, studies have shown that drug use is sort of even across different racial groups, and yet police enforcement is targeted at poor black and Latino communities. That produces significant disparities in terms of arrests. You also see a number of disparities in terms of prosecutions, right? There have been cases litigated out of Los Angeles where federal prosecutors were accused of targeting African American defendants for federal offenses and not charging a single white defendant, although those white defendants hadn't been charged. So you have it not only at the level of street enforcement in terms of racial profiling, you also have it at the level of prosecutorial discretion, and then you have it again with respect to sentencing. So it's not surprising then at the end of the day that you see these significant racial disparities. And with respect to women, women are now the fastest growing population of prisoners, right? In terms of percentage, they're not the largest group in terms of raw numbers, but in terms of the percentage of people that are going to prison, women represent the fastest growing group. And it's largely for nonviolent drug offenses. And they're mostly black women and mostly Latino for the same sorts of reasons: enforcement, discretion in terms of prosecution, and then with respect to sentencing.
And I mean, incarcerating people has become big business in the United States with these for-profit prisons. The easiest people to target, of course, are those that are using drugs and are nonviolent. So Jody, do you feel that we are living in this era of covert racism? I mean, we had this environment where it was overt, obviously, and now we are seeing, you know, certain actions being taken by prosecutors that are questionable. But do you really feel that this stems from racism, or do you feel that there's something else at play here?
Yeah, there are factors that complicate it. The sad reality is that the 100-to-1 disparity that you talked about, crack to powder cocaine, that came out of the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, and more than half the Congressional Black Caucus stood behind that act. You had Charlie Rangel in there with Reagan as he was signing the bill, okay, creating mandatory minimums for the first time, okay, and the 100-to-1 disparity. So there's been a lot of black leadership complicity in the mass incarceration of the black community over the last 30 years. And it's been running along not racial lines, but along class lines. You know, when you have people like Randy Kennedy saying we need in the black community practice of politics of respectability, whereby we distinguish between good and bad Negroes being criminals, black criminals, and Chris Rock making jokes to that effect. You have a lot within the folk within the black community who have to figure out how to politically think about and orient themselves toward the problem of crime, you know, and have been taking a hardline approach, many of them for quite a while, which has created this, which has hobbled a generation of young black men and increasingly young black women and black women generally, and then more generally socially marginalized groups. So I think it's a very complicated story. It's one that at the root of which sits class, as too often is the case.
Absolutely.
We're talking about poor, working class, and poverty-stricken people, not the black bourgeoisie.
But let me also interject here. So the narrative of crime, the association between crime and race has been sort of at the foundation of our country, right? So it's really easy for individuals, whether they're members of Congress, members of your state legislature, law enforcement, to sort of invoke this idea of lawlessness and criminality. And when they invoke that language, it's often very racialized. So there's often no way to sort of disentangle conversations about crime from conversations about race. Now, it may be the fact that, you know, African American leaders responding to communities that want to be safe and have been asking for more assistance sort of toed the line with respect to some of these very harsh and punitive policies. But even when you raise the very conversation about crime,
Yep.
you're raising a conversation about race, and that's where the covert nature of race comes into play. And certainly the cleavages within different racial communities, different Black or Latino communities, helps to facilitate the sort of harsh narrative, this tough on crime narrative that has characterized our law enforcement policy over the last 40 to 50 years. So there's no way to separate race from crime.
Diane?
It starts in childhood. I mean, it's what we call the school to prison pipeline. In California last year, there were 700,000 suspensions of kids from school.
That's amazing.
There were about 18,000 kids were expelled altogether. And if you look at it, it's mostly Black and Latino kids. You look at, you know, in a white middle class neighborhood, if a kid is tardy, late, nobody cares. Kids are truant, nobody notices, nobody cares. Kids were getting arrested for showing up at the school door a minute after the bell rang. They were being arrested and spending the day in the court or being suspended. The more times you're suspended, the further you fall behind. And we're not just talking about teenagers with weapons. Donna Groman, the juvenile court judge, says all she sees are elementary school kids being brought in for the most minor infractions. It's all Black and Latino kids, and occasionally Asian kids if it's a neighborhood that's known to have Asian gangs. It doesn't happen in middle class neighborhoods. These kids are being channeled right into the criminal justice system. They're being criminalized for being truant from school. And the longer they're out, their kids, then they end up so far behind, they end up dropping out because they're called on in class to read and they don't know how to read. Instead of giving them the resources, some kids are late because they've got a disabled parent, a disabled sibling they're taking care of. Nobody looks into their family situation to say, how can we help you and keep you in school?
Right. And the flaws.
You're a throwaway.
And the flaws in our justice system have a domino effect, and
Absolutely.
institutional racism and discriminating against those who don't have the resources to fight certain cases has a negative impact on society. You don't allow them to be hardworking, productive members of society. You just lock them away. And by the way, our tax dollars pay for that. With all of these private prisons that have popped up since the 1980s, do you think that they're really private? Private would imply that they make their money on their own. Our tax dollars fund that, and they have contracts that ensure that they have at least a 90% occupancy rate. Think about how disgusting that is, that we have a system that allows for contracts to make sure that we lock away as many people as possible. And then they're locked away, and we hear about injustices like what we discussed in the documentary, where women are being sterilized. I mean, it's crazy. But fortunately, we have an entire show today where we talk about injustice. So stick around. When we come back, we're going to talk about George Zimmerman. Of course, he got arrested again. I think all of us kind of saw that coming. We'll discuss the ramifications and more. Welcome back to The Point. One of the biggest news stories of the week has to do with George Zimmerman. He's back in the news because he is involved in another so-called domestic violence dispute. We don't know too many details yet, but here's what we do know.
Man, what's going on?
Another 911 call, another accusation against George Zimmerman.
He's in my house breaking on my because I asked him to leave. He has his freaking gun breaking all of my stuff right now.
Zimmerman arrested Monday looking vastly different in this mugshot than the clean-cut 28-year-old booked last year after his bail was revoked in the Trayvon Martin case. This time he faces charges of domestic aggravated assault, domestic battery, and criminal mischief after his current girlfriend told police she and Zimmerman had had an argument and things were turning ugly.
You just broke my glass table, you just broke my sunglasses, and you put your gun in my freaking face.
Samantha Scheib had told police Zimmerman had been packing up his shotgun and an assault rifle when he allegedly cocked the shotgun and pointed it at her. She says he then kicked her out of her home.
Are you kidding me? He didn't push me out of my house and lock me out.
Okay, you're outside now?
Yeah.
Okay, so he had a shotgun and an AR-15?
Yeah, 2 handguns.
Now, this is George Zimmerman's third domestic issue. The first one was back in 2005 with a girlfriend that he had at the time, a fiance, I should say. Then last September, he got into a fight with his estranged wife. He allegedly punched his father-in-law in the face, and he did break his wife's iPad. We have surveillance of that, so that did actually occur. And now this is the latest issue that he's involved in. And some are saying, hey, you know what? There's nothing to be surprised about because society has basically empowered him to do whatever he wants. He shot and killed a 17-year-old. He was acquitted of all charges, and as a result, you know, he probably feels like he can do whatever he wants and get away with it. However, I'm very curious to see what you guys think. Is this something that is empowering him? And do you feel that there is a possibility that this could turn really ugly where he does actually cause some damage to a person? Diane.
Why don't they take his weapons away? But actually, I would like to psychoanalyze the girlfriend. Why are women getting involved with this guy? He's bad news.
I made the same argument, and I know that people are going to think that that's victim blaming, but it's not. I think that we're making a very reasonable statement about the girlfriend.
I want to know what her think. I would like to think she was a mole who got involved with him so she could expose him, but I don't think that's the case.
No, I don't. I really don't understand why she did it either. A really weird wrinkle to the story. She's 27 years old. He had told the 911 dispatcher, he also called 911 after she did, that she was pregnant with their child, but then authorities said that no, that is not true. She's not pregnant. I don't know why he said that or where it's coming from, but I'm just happy that he's not reproducing at the moment. I don't think he's the right person to be doing that. Priscilla.
I mean, I think with, you know, to get back to George Zimmerman, I think this sort of exposes his character, the character that Trayvon Martin confronted in Sanford, Florida on that fatal night when he was shot and killed in February, right? A person who thinks that he can bully people, he can assault people and get away with it and utilize his knowledge of the legal system because he had taken all these classes to appear that he's the reasonable one, right? He's the one that confronted Trayvon Martin. He's the one that stalked Trayvon Martin, and yet he's the one that's being seen as the victim. You see him in this call, or you hear him in this call describing himself as the victim, just as he did after the confrontation after Trayvon Martin. So what we're seeing is this consistent pattern. So it's not as though he's been emboldened. He's been this way the entire time. And we just refuse to believe him, or not we, the jury refused to believe him, right? They gave him the benefit of the doubt. They related more to him than they did to Trayvon Martin, who was stalked, shot, and killed by George Zimmerman.
Jody, how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I focus less on the viciousness of George Zimmerman. I think there's clear evidence that there are vicious propensities, and they may have realized themselves on the night of his encounter with Trayvon Martin and with lethal consequences. But I prefer to see George Zimmerman as a symptom of a broader problem. Profiling was going on before George Zimmerman's case. The jury saw what he did as reasonable. You have Bernard Goetz, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, Kendrick McDade over here in Pasadena. This is a constant problem of fear of black, strapping boys, men. And profiling on that basis that even comes to someone like me. I'm at JW Marriott 2 weeks ago, and I have a guard walk up to me, 2 guards standing back, and ask me, am I there to see someone? I'm saying, I'm in the lobby, why aren't you talking to anyone else? We've been having a problem with transients, he tells me.
Wow.
I said, I look like a transient? He said, don't take it personally, sir. He goes away, they huddle, he comes back. At this point, I'm talking to an attorney from Latham and Watkins so that they can overhear the conversation. He comes back and says, who are you here to see? If I didn't give him a name, I was there to see Lino Garcia, my roommate from high school, who's the manager, who's the general manager of ESPN Deportes. If I didn't give him Lino's name, I assumed the ejectable status of a trespasser, and they were getting ready to lift me up and put me out. I had on slacks, hard shoes, a button-down shirt, I didn't have a tie, and a jacket. I look like I look now. 2 weeks ago, right downtown LA, so that was Trayvon. You know, this is my afro is my hoodie. I tell people, my afro is my hoodie. You know, I wear my heart on my head, not my sleeve, and I'm happy to be nappy, but this draws a lot of attention. You know, and it connect. I have 3 sons in college. What are you walking up on me? What do I look like, a transient vagabond vagrant? But they were getting ready to eject me from the lobby.
So many, a roller coaster of emotion as you said that. First, I'm very upset that you were called a transient or profiled as a transient, but also happy to be nappy. I've never heard that before, and I love it. I think it's great. Yeah, you're right. Profiling has been a huge issue, and I think that it does have to do with socioeconomic status. If you aren't dressed a certain way, society will look down on you. It does have to do with race and the color of your skin. But how do we overcome something like that? Because obviously it's having an impact when it comes to prosecuting people. You have juries that will relate with George Zimmerman as opposed to a 17-year-old who got shot and killed. Diane, what do we do to help change this element of society?
If I knew. Well, I think having a national conversation about it may help. Having juries that are more reflective of our communities would help. Having more control over what goes on in prosecutorial offices would help a lot too. The way extreme sentences are used to force people to take plea bargains, because if you're facing a life sentence for something you didn't do, you'll take 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you made a really great point about the dialogue. It's really important to actually talk about these situations, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to talk about race and socioeconomic status and discrimination, but it's far worse to pretend as though these issues don't exist and allow these injustices to occur. So hopefully shows like this and other independent media having similar conversations will change the way we do things within our justice system. Now, unfortunately, we don't have enough time for that topic. Every topic, I'm just like, oh, I wish we had 5 more minutes, but we don't. We got to move on to the next one, and this story will probably enrage you. There is a case in Alabama involving a 25-year-old man who was convicted of rape. In fact, he was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree rape and also 1 count of first-degree rape. However, his jail sentence was a little questionable. Take a look.
I don't understand. Like, I still can't even process it.
Baffled, Courtney Andrews says there's just no other way to describe how she feels after hearing that the man convicted of raping her repeatedly since she was 13 years old will somehow avoid jail. This week, an Alabama judge sentenced her attacker, 25-year-old Austin Clem, to a total of 30 years behind bars, but he suspended those sentences, opting to give Clem community corrections, equivalent to house arrest. Clem still has to register as a sex offender. Clem has a history of sexual assaults and, according to his attorney, was sent to a juvenile facility for a sex abuse case before he was 15. Frankly, the attorney said, I think the judge's sentence was surprising to most everyone in the courtroom. But with his track record, Andrews was convinced Clem would be sentenced to years in jail. Instead, Clem will avoid seeing the inside of a jail cell altogether if he follows the judge's orders. Even still, Dan Totten, Clem's defense attorney, says the sentence is too harsh. It doesn't appear from her actions that she was saying no, Totten said of the victim, saying the relationship was consensual. This is a case with 2 sides to the coin. The evidence was not clear and convincing.
Now, just to respond to what the attorney said there, he raped her in 2007 when she was 13 years old. He was either 18 or 19 at the time. So even if it wasn't forcible rape, which I hate that phrase, obviously it is statutory rape. And what I do find really fascinating is if you look at our current prisons and if you look at our justice system, you'll realize that about 3,278 people are serving life sentences without the chance of parole. And the majority of them are non-violent drug offenses. We have a case here where there is violence, there is rape, and for some reason this guy's never going to see a jail cell or a prison cell, which is absolutely insane. So you guys know my feelings on it. But just one more point that I'd like to make before we open it up to our panel. Dan Totten, the defense attorney for this guy, happens to be childhood friends with the judge. So let's just keep that in mind when we discuss what's going on right now in Alabama. Jody, I want to start off with you. What do you feel is happening with this case?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, again, I see this as a symptom of a larger problem. We don't take women's sexual autonomy interests seriously in this country if there's not physical force. And even then, you can have some problems. But when you get into a date rape context or a statutory rape context, you have R. Kelly getting acquitted several years back now with his face on the camera having sex with a 13, 14, 15-year-old. He got acquitted by a jury. The jury doesn't take this seriously. The American public doesn't take it seriously enough. Date rape on campuses, when it doesn't involve physical force, will result in you getting booted from that campus. I can tell you that if it comes before a board of hearing officers, you're going to get booted from the campus, but few of those cases are prosecuted by prosecutors outside the campus because they know they're going to run into jurors who aren't sympathetic. So taking women's sexual autonomy interests more seriously when there's not physical force involved is something that we just don't do, and we need to start doing. It needs to be a mass movement in that direction, and it's not there now.
Priscilla, do you feel that this might be a symptom of slut shaming? Because whenever we have a case of rape, whether it be a high school student or a grown adult, oftentimes what you'll hear is, well, did they, was it forcible? Like there's always this argument of forcible rape, right? So what do you think that's all about? There's this notion that somehow this woman wanted it. Where does that come from?
I think it speaks to some of the points that Jody was making. It's sort of our culture of victim shaming, blaming women for behavior that people think is inappropriate. And what was she doing with him at that time? What was she doing out at night? What was she wearing? Why did she go to his room, right? As if that any of those behaviors, if justifies men coercing women into sexual acts that they don't want to engage in, right? So this idea that women are, in fact, sort of goading men, right? Including women who are or aren't even women, right? Girls as young as 13 years old. There was a case out of Montana where a teacher was convicted of raping a 13-year-old girl who subsequently killed herself. That teacher was sentenced to 30 days. In jail. And the judge said she was the one that was in control. Sort of women as lustful, lascivious, people, right? Biblical, right? Who are tempting men into assaulting them. And so that is at the root of the blaming, right? For girls as young as 13 on up to women who are 72 years old. I mean, this happens across the board. And women are just blamed for their behavior, right? They're blamed for men's behavior.
So Diane, you've talked a little bit about mandatory jail sentencing and how problematic it can be. Is this a case where mandatory jail sentencing makes sense in the cases of rape or, of course, cases like murder, something that is serious, that involves real violence?
Well, what I'm really hoping, apparently the judge overstepped what he's allowed to do, and the case is being appealed, and there may be a prison sentence imposed after all, because apparently he was not allowed to set aside these serious felonies and allow him to go home. So I find mandatory minimums a nightmare. Most judges need to use discretion, especially when we're dealing with defendants who are overwhelmingly poor and traumatized and did not have decent defense attorney because they couldn't afford one. It's not just the mandatory minimums. I mean, what we've seen, especially with young people in Los Angeles, is all the enhancements. Another 10 years on your sentence if you belong to a gang, which you may not even belong to. If you're a kid of color and live in a certain neighborhood, automatically it's a gang enhancement. A gun enhancement, even if there was a gun on the scene and you never touched it and didn't even know it was there, that's another 10 years. Is it in the vicinity of a school? That's another 10 years. So you have 14-year-old kids who never actually killed anyone getting sentences of like 110 years to life. And the judges, I've been in the courtroom where the judges have said, my hands are tied. Once the guilty sentence is passed, the judge's hands are tied. How do you send a 14-year-old kid away, 110 years to life? That's being challenged now. A lot of those kids will have a chance to have a parole hearing in 10 years. The parole board is not very honest. So it doesn't mean they're going to get out.
Not very empathetic either, I imagine.
No, but they're very arbitrary and capricious, to use the legal terms. So what we're seeing is that judges should be able to use some compassion and empathy when the case warrants it, and they're not allowed to in way too many cases.
And I think This isn't a case about mandatory minimums. This is, and when we talk about our criminal justice system, often it's not just about mandatory minimums. It's about our culture and how and the value that we afford to certain people and not others, right? So women's lives and their sexual autonomy is not valued, but men's are, right? You have the lives of Black and Latino youth, Black and Latino women who are valued, and others who are not valued, and whites are. You have the parenting capacities of white women valued, whereas Black and Latino women are seen as undeserving, right? So you have this culture that devalues certain people while uplifting the humanity of others. And that's really what's at the root of all of what we're seeing, right? And we see these different policies as manifestations of this devaluing of Black and Latino lives, devaluing the lives of women, devaluing the choices that they make with respect to their reproductive and sexual autonomy. And that's what's really at the crux of this. It's not just about discretion. It's about the culture, it's about our systems, it's about our institutions and the values that they promote.
But I think in this case, there's a contradictory value here with autonomy. We're talking about women's autonomy over their bodies, but I think with our culture, with a lot of what you see on TV and in music, there's a belief among a lot of people that 13-year-olds have complete autonomy over their bodies, and they choose to give their bodies. So this whole notion of female autonomy is a double-edged sword that can be used against us. And in cases like this, it certainly was.
Yes. All right. Well, hopefully we will get what we want out of that appeal. We will update you guys on that story as it develops, but we got to take a quick break in the meantime. So let's do that, and when we come back, we are going to criticize Walmart as they should be. Welcome back to The Point. There is a holiday story involving Walmart that's getting a lot of attention. We have a video that explains more. Take a look.
A photo is causing a bit of bad PR for Walmart, but relax, okay? As Walmart spokesman Corey Lundberg explained, a photo depicting a holiday food drive not for the homeless, but for Walmart employees, two groups not necessarily mutually exclusive, is, quote, part of the company's culture to rally around associates and take care of them when they face extreme hardships. This particular extreme hardship just happens to be working at Walmart. Regardless, over at Our Walmart, which is a labor organization whose mission is to unionize Walmart associates, they put the number that people make on average around $15,000. To put that in perspective, the poverty line in America is $23,550 for a 4-person household. Bottom line, Walmart doesn't pay so great.
Wow. So Walmart is aware that they're underpaying their employees, so they have a food drive for their own employees. And the fascinating part about this is a spokesperson came out, released a statement, and he said something along the lines of, well, yeah, I mean, we're just trying to do something nice for our employees that have tough times during the holidays. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. And that is so unbelievable to me. Instead of taking action with your highly profitable company and making changes so these people have a livable income, you're deciding to put that burden on other people. By the way, the Americans that are now funding the governmental programs for these employees, right? The government subsidizes these people as a result of Walmart not paying them enough. So let's have a little bit of a discussion about that. Priscilla, I want to start off with you. I mean, what's going to end up happening with Walmart? I mean, they keep trying these PR stunts to get in everyone's good graces, but then they do crap like this.
I don't know. I mean, this is sort of the Grinch who stole Christmas, the Grinch who stole Thanksgiving. You know, they're making their employees work on Thanksgiving Day, and they're not paying them, right? They're not paying them enough to even feed their own families on these holidays, to be able to provide for themselves. So what's going to happen with Walmart? You know, I think they will continue to engage in the kind of economic policies that they're engaged in until they're held accountable, until there's some market consequence for this. And the question is for all of us, are we willing to hold Walmart accountable for the exploitation of their labor force, for the costs that they're imposing on all of us? Are we going to make sure that they can raise the wages of their employees to a livable wage that we all benefit, because they are the largest employer in the country?
They are.
Imagine the consequence that would have for all of us if they raised the wages they were paying their employees. That would have national implications. That would raise the quality of life, not just for their employees and their families, but for all of us.
Absolutely. I feel like whenever it comes to these issues, when it comes to increasing the minimum wage or ensuring that these companies are paying a living wage, and we're seeing it with fast food companies as well, you know, we tend to neglect the middle class and the importance of the middle class when it comes to them contributing to our economy. An economy doesn't work if you have the top 1% earning all the wealth. But Jody, do you feel like, you know, people in the middle class are rallying together in support of one another? Because there seems to be a little bit of a divide, but I could be wrong about that.
Well, yeah, I see Walmart just like I see George Zimmerman as a symptom of a bigger problem. I see Walmart is a symptom of the failure of 30 years of policy. You know, NAFTA, free trade agreements, where we destroy unions, where we rob the working class of its power to negotiate decent living wages, where we let jobs go overseas without trying to hold on to them in ways that will grow a middle class. And so at the end of the day, Walmart winds up being an exemplar of where we've gone as an economy with our working class. But it's not just them alone. They'll say to them, they will tell you, we're just rational profit maximizing egoists. We have shareholders. We're just doing, if we didn't do it, somebody else would. Okay? And that's the nature of the economy and macroeconomic forces that people like Clinton unleashed with NAFTA, that Dems and Republicans, both sides, don't care about working people, don't care about the underclass. And so this is, to me, this is a symptom of a pathology that is political in nature and has been running over 30 years.
Diane?
I agree with him completely, but I'm going to cheat a little because if we weren't subsidizing Walmart with all the government funds, we would have those funds to use for other things. And I want to put in a plug, since we were talking about prisons. You know, we passed Prop 36 that said that nonviolent, non-serious, non-sexual offenders who under 3 strikes were sentenced 25 years to life could have their cases reconsidered. They could be resentenced, they could be sent home. There are still 800 prisoners from LA County who are still in prison a year after that was passed because there's no place for them to go. The judge in LA is slowly looking at each case one by one, and they won't let the men and women out unless there's a transitional plan in place for them. So right now, prisoners who use wheelchairs, there's no place that's ADA compliant for them to go. People who have drug or emotional or psychological problems, there's no place for them to go. They're entitled to be released. They should be free today, but 800 of them from LA County are still locked up a year after we passed this law.
So what do you think should happen? Where should they go? Do you think that
corporations... If we had that money that we're using to subsidize Walmart, maybe we could have transitional housing. We could have reentry programs. These people are in prison where we're paying plenty to keep them there because on the outside there's no place for them.
Yeah, you make a really great point about that. Just to give you guys a sense of how much money we spend on subsidizing Walmart, and this is based on what the government put out there. Okay, this is a governmental study. They found that we spend as much as $1.7 million a year on each Walmart supercenter with 300 employees. That's just to show you how much money we are spending to make sure that these people can put food on their tables. No person in the U.S. who is working a full-time job should be struggling to make ends meet. They should live a decent life with a livable income, okay? So anyone who supports Walmart or shops at Walmart fuels this type of behavior. And I really feel like officials in Congress need to grow some balls and make sure that these people are paid appropriately. Anyway, that's a topic that really upsets me because I hate seeing people work multiple jobs, work more than 40 hours a week, and they still can't provide for their families. What kind of country are we living in?
Well, let me tell you, I'm hopeful about Walmart, and the reason why I'm hopeful, notwithstanding all the things that Jody mentioned, is because of the folks that are working there that are struggling and the folks that are standing in solidarity with them, pushing for unionization, pushing for better working conditions. And I think that they've hit a point nationally where now their voices are really starting to be heard. You know, you're sort of having these protests not only at Walmart but also at low-wage fast food organizations where the employees and their communities are really starting to rally around them with respect to this question of unionization. So I'm really hopeful about that.
All right, well, let's end on that positive note. And I want to give you guys an opportunity to plug some of the stuff you're working on. Priscilla, we'll start with you.
Thanks. So I'm working on a project regarding realignment and women prisoners, trying to make sure that we don't increase the number of women who are going to prisons in the state of California. And I'm still writing about and talking about and teaching about the reproductive rights of poor women of color and women prisoners.
That's excellent. Very important work there. Jody.
My passion right now is Rap, Race, and Redemption, a production I'm putting together for USC having to do with art and justice, combining popular culture and discussions of racial and social justice.
Excellent. And Diane?
My novel, The Fiery Alphabet, just came out about an 18th century free thinker. And I will have a chapter in a forthcoming book about mass incarceration. Mine is about initiatives around the country to disrupt that school-to-prison pipeline.
Oh, that's great. It's always an honor to do this job because I get to talk to so many interesting people that are really pushing for social change. You guys know who I am. I'm Anna Kasparian. You can watch me on the Young Turks Monday through Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. And please tell us what you thought about the show. Comment and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And we will see you guys next week with another No Filter. During the holidays, you guys are going to see some No Filters popping up on this channel. And after the holidays, we will have a new episode. But it'll give you guys a lot of time to catch up on some of the quality programming we do on this show. We'll see you soon.